At any given time, the political sphere, our world, is constituted by a given hegemony, a given common sense. Whatever is naturalized could always have been otherwise, but the power of this hegemony, of this common sense, is predicated on the exclusion of all other possibilities. In reality, hegemonic power is temporary and precarious. It's reliant on a process of sedimenting that takes place in the arena of the social. As such, politics isn't limited to party political institutions, but takes place in a range of sites across civil society, essentially wherever this hegemony, this common sense, is being reproduced. Art and cultural practices more broadly have a privileged role to play in the diffusion of a common sense. As such, I would say art is necessarily political, because it's either engaged in a kind of reproduction of this hegemony, of this common sense, or a disarticulation. As a result, I would argue those involved in art and cultural practices have to take the responsibility that comes with political agency. Art must always engage in an active process of disarticulation of a given hegemony of the common sense of the time and rearticulate alternative possible presents and futures. I'm a curator and researcher, and today here in my role with Arts Catalyst. We're a commissioning agency that deals with the intersections of art, science, technology, and society. We have a commitment to transdisciplinary working, initiating collaborations between artists, scientists, technologists, and community groups. Arts Catalyst produced the first zero-gravity flights with artists and choreographers in collaboration with Star City in Russia. More recently, with artist Ariel Guzek, we've produced fully functioning submersibles designed to communicate with whales and dolphins. With Critical Art Ensemble, we restaged a historic biological weapons test in Scotland, the resulting documentary producing a scathing critique on US bioweapons policy. We also produced 3 annual artist air shows, which commissioned artists, challenged artists to experiment with flight. How much does scientific creativity differ from artistic creativity? I'm just going to refer to one concept called the coefficient of art. It's a concept that I'm taking from a book called The Lexicon of Usership, developed in the first presentation of the Arte Utile archive at the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven. The coefficient of art is essentially an idea that art isn't a set of objects, practices, and events discrete from other practices, objects, and events, but more a degree of intensity. So you don't have things that are art and aren't art, that's a mouthful, but more a kind of scale of creativity. So practices from all sorts of fields can sit somewhere on that scale of creativity. Secondly, can scientific knowledge be communicated through art? I think this is, for me, a more problematic question. I think perhaps it can, but I would ask whether it should. I think it's a question that comes up a lot at Arts Catalyst, and I think perhaps this way of working would tend not to do justice either to the art or the science, or perhaps expand the audience much beyond the same kind of, we're a similar white middle class enclave just as the sciences. I think what art can do is, going back to my kind of preamble, question a kind of given common sense, a given hegemony of a time. It can make visible things that hegemony doesn't allow us to see otherwise. And I think perhaps more optimistically, through the kind of practices that I've talked about, that perhaps create moments of the commons, alternatives to capitalism, real alternatives to capitalism in the present. That allows us to think about a future where we might live in a different economic architecture altogether. It's not that I'm arguing that artistic practice has the kind of soul preserved to invent this new future. I think what we need is what Antonio Gramsci, the Italian philosopher, would call a war of position. So a range of practices in the economic, legal, scientific, and artistic, all critiquing the current common sense, the current hegemony. I think we can see that in, for example, the British Society for Social Responsibility in Science, or CAT. And I think with that in mind, I wanted to close now with a quote. It's probably the laziest quote ever. It's a quote taken from the cover of a book. A book I have read, but nonetheless, it's from the cover. It's a book called Inventing the Future by Alex Williams and Nick Schoencheck, in which they try and imagine a post-capitalist future. They kind of subtly suggest that we demand full autonomy. So this is a future in which technology frees all humanity from wage labor. That we demand a universal basic income, an economic infrastructure in which every citizen is paid a basic wage. That we demand the future. Thank you.